Okay, today's daf we're going to be learning is Yevamot daf nun chet. Today's daf is dedicated in memory of the fallen soldiers that were killed protecting the state of Israel and in memory of those that were killed in terrorist attacks and died by Kiddush Hashem. Today's daf is also sponsored by Goldie Gilad in loving memory of Paul Whiteson, son of her dear friends Rima and Harry. Paul fell on the 9th of Shvat, 5735. And there's an option if you would like. There's a site called Lakish. The link is up on the daf post. You can dedicate your daf and Yom HaZikaron to the memory of one of the fallen soldiers. There's also a sheet for today, which will be helpful. We're going to get started now with our daf. We had a Mishnah starting at the very bottom of Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. Itma Rav Amram Yesh chuppah l'psulot and Shmuel Amar en chuppah l'psulot. If you remember, let's just go back even a minute to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah had stated that there was a machloket between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon on the one hand versus Rabbi Meir on the other hand about if kiddushin between a couple that is not allowed to get married, like a kohen and a divorcee, does that disqualify her if she's a bat kohen from eating truma? Is the kiddushin enough, or does it have to be only once they had relations? So we saw that there was this debate. Rabbi Meir said she can no longer eat truma from the time of kiddushin, and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon said she could. That was kiddushin. Remember, there's three stages basically. There's kiddushin, there's going to the chuppah. We talked about this yesterday. And then there's actually consummating the marriage by having relations. So we then saw, so the whole machloket of the Mishnah was about the stage of kiddushin. Can that already disqualify her from eating truma? The next thing we saw was that in the Gemara here, starting again at the very bottom of Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, really in Nun Zayin Amud Bet, there's machloket Rav and Shmuel about yesh chuppah l'psula. If you just go under the chuppah, or whatever we call chuppah, which we discussed yesterday, different options, in a forbidden relationship between a kohen and someone they're not allowed to, will that already disqualify if she's a bat kohen from eating truma? So that's the second debate. The question is, Rami Bar Chama, we ended yesterday's daf by saying that Rami Bar Chama says these debates are connected. Okay, why are these debates connected? I'm a Rami Bar Chama. We're now going to read from the bottom of Nun Zayin Amud Bet. Yesh chuppah l'psulot banu l'machlokes Rabbi Meir Elazar Rabbi Shimon. This whole thing all depends on whether you hold by Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, who allow it with kiddushin and allow you to continue eating truma, or you hold by Rabbi Meir, who says you don't allow it. It's the exact same thing. The Rabbi Meir de Amal kiddushin pasle. Now he's going to explain why. If you say that kiddushin disqualify you, then chuppah nami pasla. Then chuppah would be the same. We have to say here, and I think I mentioned this yesterday, that what we mean here is chuppah without kiddushin. Obviously, if there was kiddushin, then kiddushin would have either disqualified you or not disqualified you, depending on. This is where, for some reason, they skip the stage of kiddushin, even though normally you don't do that. But in a case where they skip the stage of kiddushin and they went straight to chuppah. So the question is, right, now we're going to say very simply, if you hold kiddushin can already disqualify you, then if you didn't do kiddushin, but you did chuppah, it would have the same status, the same, the same effect as kiddushin. And therefore, chuppah would also disqualify you from eating. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon de Amar kiddushin lo pasle. But Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon said kiddushin does not disqualify you. Well, then obviously chuppah nami lo pasle. So they would say then chuppah also wouldn't disqualify you. Basically, what Rami Bar Chama is saying is, I don't understand why Rav and Shmuel have a machloket about this. This is the exact same machloket in our Mishnah, basically. Okay? So the Gemara is now going to reject Rami Bar Chama and say, not true. Mimai, why do you think it's the same thing? It's not the same thing. And we're going to show each opinion in the Mishnah would hold differently potentially here. Mimai. Kiddushin is actually an acquiring. There's an act going on of acquiring. That's ishani knet, right? The woman is acquired in three ways. Kesef, shtar, bi'ah. That's kiddushin. Chuppah is not, there's no kinyan that goes on at all. So Rabbi Meir, who says that the kiddushin itself can forbid her already, disqualify her because this was a forbidden relationship, and now disqualify her from eating truma, that would apply to kiddushin, because kiddushin, there's an act going on of acquiring. But chuppah, there's no such thing. Chuppah is much less of an effective connection between them. So therefore, right, there's no kinyan going on. There's no acquiring. Therefore, chuppah to lokane lasari, she's not acquired. Therefore, you would say, okay, nothing. It's not enough to forbid her to eat truma, to disqualify her. So again, Rabbi Meir, who said there in kiddushin it would work, wouldn't necessarily say here it would work. Again, we don't really know what Rabbi Meir would say here. We're just conjecturing. We're basically trying to say, Rami bar Chama, it's very hard to prove what you're saying because we can prove the opposite. Inami, alternatively, from the flip side, if you want to look at Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, who permit it when it comes to kiddushin, don't say she's disqualified. You could say, why? Now, before we even move on, what does chuppah do? We talked about this yesterday. Chuppah basically, right, you go under a canopy or you go into a yichud room, right, depending on all the possible definition, but it's someone that connects the couple, and it's as if you could potentially right now have relations. So you might say, kiddushin, they say, doesn't do anything to disqualify you because dilo krivi libia. You're not close to having relations at this point. First of all, they often did it a year before. And even if it's just not an action now, it's true in action. It gets you toward the moment where you will have relations, but it's far off from it. It's not a direct correlation because at this point, you're actually forbidden to be with each other still. And therefore, it's supposed to represent the fact that you can have relations together. Then it would disqualify you, because what's going to actually disqualify you? The bi'ah, the intercourse. Since this is the basically the act that's going to say now you can, and it's as if representing that you can, the potential that you can. Therefore, we'll say that even Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, who permitted there, will say now you're disqualified from eating truma. So we basically knocked out Rami bar Chama and said you can't say it's the same machloket because each side could say something different. But they kind of like the idea that he suggested that maybe it's a machloket tanaim. So he says, I want to point out one thing that's a little bit strange in the sugya. Normally, what we'd say, we would have expected Rami bar Chama to say the words kitanai. The machloket Rav and Shmuel is just like a machloket tanaim. And it's not clear whether Rami bar Chama is trying to say, this is a machloket tanaim. In other words, Rav and Shmuel, you each side with the side on the machloket tanaim, and we'll say the same thing right now. And it's kind of like a positive statement saying, okay, we have your machloket. Let's just say it's rooted in an earlier machloket. But then the language in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, doesn't work for that. The language of the Gemara should have been lema kitanai. Why don't we suggest that there's a machloket tanaim? So it's a little bit strange. It's not clear. Are they saying it as a positive statement, or are they saying can't be Rav and Shmuel disagree with this because the tanaim disagree with this, and then again, why can't they debate about the same issue? Well, maybe they're saying they wouldn't come up with a debate if it was already debated in the Tanaitic time period. So it's unclear whether it's meant to be something against sort of saying Rav says this, Shmuel says this, but what do you mean? It's already a machloket tanaim, or whether it's trying to say they line up with each one with a different Tana. So to me, it makes more sense to say they each line up with a different Tana. However, the language doesn't match that 100%. So it's a good question. Sometimes the language of each sugya, it doesn't always match, and it could be that's what it's doing. In any case, let's read on. So now they say, if you want to say it's a machloket tanaim, I'll give you a different one. Now, this braita, we're going to see it in parts. We're going to start reading it. The first opinion, we're not going to really understand it. We're going to have to reread it and explain it a little differently. That will be then one opinion, and then we'll get to the second opinion. So, if you want to say something, be plugged to dahani tonight. Let's say it's this machloket tanaim. Titanya, as it says in a braita, nis'u zo lazo. If a Kohen marries a woman, right, they marry each other, kshirot upsulot, whether they're kosher to marry a Kohen or they're disqualified for marrying a Kohen, like our case, right? That would be our case. Oh, shenichnisu lechuppah v'lo nivalu. Okay, we have two options. Either they got married to each other, or they went into the chuppah but didn't yet have relations. We don't yet know what it means, nis'u zola. So we assume, what does it mean? Right, you can figure this out. If the second part is nichnesu lechuppah v'lo nivalu, they went under the chuppah and didn't have relations, you can assume nis'u means they got fully married and have relations already. But that's going to create a problem, as you'll see immediately. What does it say? Either of those two scenarios, ochlot mishalo ve'ochlot betruma. They can eat from him, like if he's a Kohen, they can eat his food, and ochlot betruma. In other words, they're basically married to him and they can eat truma. Now, this would make no sense. If he married a woman who was a grusha and have relations with her, everybody agrees that they can't eat truma, right? She's disqualified. She can't eat truma. She's disqualified from eating truma because it was a forbidden relationship. So this doesn't make any sense. This braita, we're going to have to reread it. So that's what now you'll see it's a little tricky because the Gemara leaves out a lot of words. This happens sometimes where they kind of assume you know where they're going. So the Gemara now says, nichnesu, right? Because it says nichnesu lechuppah velo nivalu. Michlal, and from that you can infer exactly what I said before. Then nisu is nisu mamash. When it says they got married in the first part, it must mean they got married completely, consummated the marriage. But that can't possibly be. Okay, they don't say this, but they mean it as a serious question. That makes absolutely no sense because everybody agrees she can't eat truma. Right? And then it says, Ela lav, it must not be that. It must be kigon shenichnesu lechuppah velo nivalu. It must be even the first part is the same as the second part. Now, how could it be? It says this case and that case. What it means is this case, nisu, which means when it says oh nivalu, it doesn't really mean or. It means, nichnesu lechuppah velo nivalu. It means that when we say nisu zo lazo, kshirot or psulot, we mean nichnesu lechuppah velo nivalu. That's the definition of nisu in this braita. Okay, the braita is defining its own case. And then it's not two cases, it's one case. And the case is exactly the case we're looking for, where there was chuppah, but no relations. Okay, so now we're back to the braita. Now we can just read the braita again, but read it the new way, right? So again, now let's read it from the top. I'm going back to where it says, Nisu zovazo, ksherodu psulo, right? A kohen marries a woman, whether it's a grusha or not, but which means that they were only nichnesu lechuppah velo nivalu if they haven't yet done be'ilah, which is exactly our case. Yesh chuppah lepsulot or ain't chuppah lepsulot, right? What does it tell you? Ochlim betruma, she can still eat truma. So what do you see? Oh, if she can eat truma, clearly ain chuppah lepsulot, right? And that matches Shmuel's opinion, that it doesn't disqualify her. Now it continues, Rabbi Shimon ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, Meir, here's the dissenting opinion, which is going to match Rav. Kol shebiatama achilata, chuppatama achilata. If the bi'ah, if when they have relations, it will enable her to eat truma, then the chuppah will also. In other words, if it's something where she's about to marry him, she's a regular woman, not divorced or something else that can't marry a kohen, if her bi'ah will allow her to eat truma, then already the chuppah will allow her. And likewise, right, the flip side, kol she'ein bi'atam achilata, but if she's a divorcee trying to marry a kohen, and it won't enable her to eat truma, then ein chuppatam achilata, then the chuppah won't enable her to eat truma either, meaning it will disqualify her, which matches Rav. Yesh chuppah lepsulot, the chuppah is enough to basically disqualify her. So that's how we understand this machloket. Perfect. This is exactly the machloket of Rav and Shmuel. That's what we were looking for. To which the Gemara says, Mimai, no, not necessarily either. Maybe you misunderstood Rabbi Shimon. Now remember, we said yesh chuppah lepsulot means that they didn't do kiddushin. Remember, they skipped that stage here, because if they did kiddushin, that was a machloket in the Mishnah. This is a machloket about chuppah, without kiddushin, where there wasn't already kiddushin. So here they say, Dilma Rabbi Shimon ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka ki Rabbi Meir sfirale. Maybe Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, is referring to Rabbi Meir. Maybe he holds like Rabbi Meir. D'amar kiddushin lo achla, who holds that kiddushin doesn't allow you to eat. And then basically saying, here, what's the situation? They go to the chuppah, velo nivalu. Why does Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka say you're disqualified? Not because of the chuppah, because of the kiddushin that preceded the chuppah. There's no reason to assume here, like we did in Yesh chuppah l'psulot, you'd have to say there was no kiddushin. Otherwise, already the kiddushin would have affected maybe the change, at least according to Rabbi Meir. But here the issue is, there could have been kiddushin before. It's the kiddushin that already messed her up. It's not the chuppah. And then Rabbi Shimon ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka has nothing specifically to say about chuppah. It's really based on the kiddushin that must have happened previously. And that's why she's disqualified, because of the kiddushin, but not necessarily the chuppah. Because remember, we already said, you might say kiddushin, but not chuppah, because chuppah isn't a kinyan. It's not an acquiring. It doesn't have that much power. So the obvious question against this theory is, again, this is to knock out the fact that this machloket is the same machloket as Rav and Shmuel. So now we say, wait, how can you say he's talking about kiddushin? If he was talking about kiddushin, and kiddushin was what affected the disqualification of the woman from eating truma, then it shouldn't have said that line. What did it say? If her bi'ah, right, allows her to eat, that it doesn't allow her to eat, then, right, if that will disqualify her, then her chuppah disqualifies her. It says specifically, chuppah disqualifies, not kiddushin. So where do you get to kiddushin, right? If it was kiddushin that disqualifies her, what should Rabbi Shimon have said? Kol she'ein bi'atam achilata, ein kaspam achilata mebayale, the kesef of the kiddushin, right? It could have said, or kol she'ein kiddusheha, but the point is, it should have used a language that represented the kiddushin and the acquiring and not the chuppah. So it's hard to say that. To which the Gemara says, no, you can easily say the chuppah meant kiddushin. And why did he use the language of chuppah? Remember, what did Tanakama say? Not only does kiddushin not do it, but even chuppah doesn't do it, right? Chuppah won't disqualify you according to Tanakama. So comes Rabbi Shmuel, and he responds in the language that Tanakama was using. Tanakama specifically talked about chuppah. So he just relates to chuppah, what he really meant was kiddushin, in which case, this isn't the same machloket, in which case, right, we throw this out the window. So basically, what we tried so far to do today, again, it wasn't clear. I told you, it's not clear whether this is in a positive formulation. We want to say, oh, well, the machloket Rav and Shmuel is like a machloket between two Tanaim, or it's a negative thing saying, what do you mean Rav and Shmuel debate this? This was already a Tanaitic debate. But either which way you look at it, there was an attempt to say there's a Tanaim who debate the exact same thing. Each time we said, no, it's not the same machloket. Amar Rav Amram. Ha milta Amar lam Rav Sheshet. We had this exact language. I can't remember if it was a day ago or 2 days ago, but we had this exact same language where Rav Amram came and said, Rav Sheshet said the following thing, and I will enlighten our eyes from the Mishnah. I will prove it from the Mishnah. Now, last time it was from our Mishnah. This time it's from a different Mishnah. It's a Mishnah in Masechet Sotah. Okay, you can find it in the Gemara. I didn't look up what parak and what Mishnah, but in the Gemara, it's on Yudchet Amud Aleph to Amud Bet. And he says, first we have to see, okay, this was just his intro sentence. Now we need to see what did Rav Sheshet say and how can we prove from the Mishnah in Sotah? And then we're going to have a whole question, can you really prove from the Mishnah in Sotah? There's going to be a lot of today's stuff is going to be trying to figure out how to read this Mishnah in Sotah. So the Mishnah, so first the halacha of Rav Sheshet is yesh chuppah l'psula. So Rav Sheshet, basically, you could say in other words, he paskin like Rav, that the chuppah, without having relations, right, without the bi'ah, already disqualifies a woman from truma if she's not allowed to, right? If it's remember, we said, and we'll see this later again today, if it's she's, the way the Gemara called it, mishtameret libi'ah psula, right? She's basically waiting. She's ready to do a bi'ah psula, right? We use that language by the kiddushin, but it's the same thing for the chuppah. She's basically about to enter into a union with, right? She's entered into a union by marriage, but not yet by consummating the marriage. That's already enough to disqualify her. So Tana Tuna, here's the proof from the Mishnah. Our Tana says, Amen. Okay, this is by the Sotah. One of the things she does, right? She's supposed to drink the waters, and then Ubau Hamayim. I'll read you the pasuk. It's in Bamidbar, chapter 5, verse 22. The waters, the bitter waters that she drinks, right there. The Kohen says they're going to come in your insides. Litzbod betem v'limpol yerech. Okay, and this is what it's coming to do. Va'amra ha'isha amen. She says amen. Okay, she basically confirms what he says. So what does this amen mean? Amen, they view it as a form of swearing. She's basically saying, amen, shelo satiti arusa unisua shemechet yabam uknusa. I swear that I didn't leave you, right, and go be with some other man when I was engaged, when I was married, when I was a shomeret yabam, when I was supposed to marry this other person, right, this yabam, or when I was married. We're going to have to see what's the difference between nisua and knusa, okay? It seems clear. Knusa here refers to the yibam relationship, right? The knisa into the yibam relationship as opposed to the nisua from marriage, right? So we have this parallelism, arusa, nisua, shomeret yabam, right? Which is also before she does yibam, and knusa. So the big question is, Hai arusa hechidam. What is this case where she says, I didn't stray from you when I was betrothed? Ilema, yeah, there's certain stages that have to happen for a woman to become a Sotah and drink the Sotah waters. And we'll learn a few as we go along, but I'll tell you the basics. First, the woman, right, they get married. Okay, well, we'll see. You have to be married, or we don't know, maybe betrothed is enough. We'll see that. Then he's jealous of her. Then he warns, right, he's jealous. It's called kinoi, and he warns her. That's the stage of kinoi where he's jealous. And he says, if you go with this man, I'm forbidding you to be alone with this man. Then stira, that means she goes alone in the room with a man. There's witnesses that see them go into the room. Nobody knows what transpired in the room. And then, since he thinks and he's worried that maybe they had relations, Then he takes her to the Beit Din, to the Beit HaMikdash. We go through the whole process. I'm not going to go through all the details. She drinks the Sotah waters, etc. And then we see what happens, right? So now, right, her response to the Sotah waters is going to prove whether she was innocent or guilty. So now the question is, how could it be a case of an arusa? Because, okay, we don't know yet why this is the problem, but you'll see in a minute. He warned her when she was arusa. Okay, he already did the kinoi, the jealousy, and then he had the warning when she was engaged. She arusa, and then she went into a room alone, and then he has her drink the Sotah waters while she's still engaged. Arusa bat mishyahi, that can't possibly be, because in arusa, a betrothed woman does not drink the waters. The Hatznan, it says in the Mishnah, arusa v'shomeret yabam lo shotot v'lo notlot ktubata. If an arusa or a shomeret yabam, or again, a shomeret yabam, she's waiting to do yevama, she hadn't yet married him. If she's suspected and goes through the whole process, she doesn't drink the Sotah waters. Sotah waters are only if she's already married, not if she was only betrothed. And by the way, lo notlot ktubata, well, since they went against their husband, right, her to-be husband, right, but the betrothed husband, since he said, don't do this, and she went anyway into a room and there were witnesses, so she loses her ketubah money. Okay, we're not going to make her drink the Sotah waters, but she is going to lose her ketubah money. I see you asked about whether Sotah, do we know if Sotah ever really happened? We'll talk about this a lot when we get to Masechet Sotah. It does seem quite unlikely that Sotah even ever really happened. Okay, so there's very little proof that they ever really went through this process. We'll get to that when we get to Sotah more, but I wanted to just at least address it for those who are wondering. Okay, so I have all sorts of theories about why we have this crazy ceremony, if especially it never really happened. Anyway, we'll get to that when we learn Masechet Sotah, and you can come up with your own theories as well. Okay, so now, arusa can't be that the whole process happened while she was engaged, because that wouldn't be. We already know it's not true. Ella, right? You don't go through the drinking the Sotah waters, which means she wouldn't get to this line of amen lo satiti arusa, because that would only happen if she's drinking the waters. Ella, so option number 2. So the whole beginning stages, the kinoi, the stira, she goes into the room alone, that all happened when she was betrothed. But she only drank the waters, he only brought her to the temple once she was already married to him. Well, that doesn't work either. Mibad kalamaya, would the waters work in this case? Here's a fascinating halacha. That will in Gefet will go up. I know the Gefet in English hasn't gone up since last week yet. It's supposed to be coming sometime this week. And hopefully the English for the Gefet for this week will come soon. But anyway, this is their topic, which is a fascinating topic. Vinika ha'ish me'avon. Okay, we always think that the woman is guilty in the Sotah, right? That's the whole thing. It's against the Sotah. There's a pasuk there that says, and the man will be free from iniquity. So now the question is, okay, it says, in other words, he will be free of guilt and she will be the guilty one. Okay, which sounds kind of like she's the one to blame. But the rabbis take this and flip it on its head. And what do the rabbis say? A great line. Particularly from the perspective of women. When the man is free of iniquity, then it will work. If he's not free from iniquity and he's accusing his wife of doing something wrong, well, the waters are not going to work, which means you can't accuse your wife of being a Sotah if you yourself, the man, has done something wrong. Now, what does this mean? That's a good question. That's a whole debate among the Mepharshim. But for our intents and purposes here in the Sugya, what it means is, if you recall, we talked about this before, I believe, but if not, here we'll go right now, which is the man, when he accuses his wife of sleeping with someone else, right? We know if she really slept with someone else, she can't ever go back to him and she can't be with the man that she slept with, which means that from the moment he accuses her, he's not allowed to be together with her. Now, if we say what happened was she was engaged and then he was jealous of her and then she was in the room alone with the man and then they got married, what does it mean they got married? They got married means they consummated the marriage and they have relations. Well, he was forbidden to have relations with her. So this isn't going to work. The Sotah waters would never work if that were the scenario because he's done something wrong. He's had relations with his wife in a situation where he was not allowed to. So that can't be it. So next. So let's just say exactly our case, right? Where there was chuppah, but there was no be'ilah. Exact same thing we just described. Kino, right? Erusin, kinoi, stira, marriage, but without consummating the marriage. And then she's married already, technically, because there was chuppah. And now she does the Sotah waters. Now, what do you see here? Chuppah is enough to disqualify her, right? That she can drink the Sotah waters, even though she hasn't yet had relations with him. So that's Shema Mina Yesh Chuppah L'Psulot. So basically what he says in a very complicated way, so we got there, but in simple terms, he's saying the Mishnah in Sotah proves, because the only way you could have this Mishnah is if there was Erusin without, right? There was chuppah without be'ilah. Otherwise, he would have been not free from iniquity. Then that proves yesh chuppah l'psula. So I'm a Rava. Rava says, what are you talking about? The tizbara? That can't possibly be. This Mishnah is clearly a mistake. There's a mistake in this Mishnah, and therefore you can't use it to prove anything. Why is there a mistake? Because you missed one important point. When Rabbi Acha came from the south, he brought a Mishnah in his hands, saying, a braita, saying, Mi baladei ishech. Okay, it says, At kisati tachal ishech, right? You strayed from under your husband, because you ended up sleeping with another man, Mi baladei ishech, who was other than your husband. Now, your husband seems to imply that they had already had relations. So the drasha here says, right, in addition to your husband means Misha kadmash chivat baal leboel, velo shekadmash chivat boel labaal. There can never be a case of an arusa. Why? Because this line of arusa that you're learning this whole thing from is a mistake. Because it can't possibly be. We just said it can only happen in a case where they were married but didn't have relations yet. That can't possibly be, because you can't accuse her. The first stage that has to happen is you sleep with your husband. If you haven't slept with your husband, he can't start accusing you of being with another man. That they learn from this drasha. So that Mishnah makes no sense of arusa. Well, we're going to have three proofs of how, or three explanations of how the Mishnah could work. Okay, starting with number one. Amarami Barham. Mishkachala kigon sheba'aleha arusa bebeit avia. You could say the Mishnah works. And how does it work? Remember, we just said that the be'ilah happened in the very beginning, the sexual relations. So what do we say here? They had relations before. When they first got engaged, betrothed, they had relations. Maybe they shouldn't have, but they did. So it must have been a case where they were together in the beginning. Then he was jealous of her. Then she went in the room alone. Then they did chuppah. And then, right? And then there was no be'ilah of the chuppah after the chuppah, because then it would have been forbidden. Because he's only forbidden to be with her after he warned her. So the be'ilah happened first, the first be'ilah. Then there was no be'ilah after that. Then you can have a situation. Well, the Gemara says, could that really be? Because we're going to assume that arusa is parallel to shomeret yabam, which means that however we define the case of arusa, which now we said she already had relations with him in the beginning when she was only betrothed and in the house of her father. Well, if that would have happened with a yabam, what would have happened? Let's say he, right, at an early stage, before he planned to marry her, right, remember, we learned b'shogeg, right? Let's say he didn't realize this was going to do the mitzvah of yibum, and he has relations with her in her father's house. Well, what would we call that? Would we call that shomeret yabam? No. How do you do yibum? Remember, bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid. That will fulfill the mitzvah of yibum. She'd already be married to him, not betrothed, not a shomeret yabam situation. So shomeret yabam currently, ishto ma'al, she'd be his full-fledged wife at that point. So you wouldn't call it a shomeret yabam. So again, assuming there's parallelism in this Mishnah, arusa is like shomeret yabam, and that means they have relations at the beginning. Well, then she won't be a shomeret yabam. She'll be a full wife. Daha amar Rav, because what did Rav say? Kanala kol. Remember, if you do a b'shogeg, Rav said we just had this machlok at Rav and Shmuel. She's yours for all intents and purposes. Everything, she's your wife. So she wouldn't be called the shomeret yabam. So the Gemara answers, don't worry about that. You could say Shmuel. It's like Shmuel Damar lo kana ele lidvarim hamurim b'parasha. Remember, he said it only works for certain things. She's not your full-fledged wife. Therefore, theoretically, you could call her a shomeret yabam. What's the problem with saying it full-fledged Shmuel? Well, you have to remember what we do this whole thing in the first place. We were trying to prove that our Mishnah supports Rav, who said yesh chuppah l'psulot. So midu tam el Rav, hama Rav kana l'kol. we're trying to explain this Mishnah according to Rav, and Rav said kanalako, so you can't possibly say it's a shomeret yabam who we have relations with b'shogeg in her father's house, like the arusa. We didn't mean to betroth her for the purposes of yibum, because according to Rav, he didn't mean to, have relations with her for the purposes of yibum, because according to Rav, she would be his full-fledged wife, and the whole thing is we're trying to explain the Mishnah according to Rav. So that doesn't work. So they say, okay, we'll give you a different explanation. Why is she called a shomeret yabam, and similar though to an arusa? She did ma'amal, he did ma'amar with her. Then he had relations with her. Okay, Rashi even says, right? He wasn't supposed to yet, but he had relations with her, right, in his znut manner, in her father-in-law's house, in his father-in-law's house, right, meaning her house. And Beit Shammai hi da'amre ma'amar koneh kinyan gamur. And then it would be according to Beit Shammai, who says ma'amar is koneh kinyan gamur. Now again, it would be strange to explain the Mishnah according to Beit Shammai, but that's what they say. And then you would basically say that, right, that he was koneh her with the bi'at znut, right, but she's still called a shomeret yabam because it was only ma'amal. Okay, and then it would be effective, right? So that's a way of explaining the Mishnah. Okay, so we answered the question about erusin and shomeret yabam because we said it's ma'amal, and then he did his bi'at znut, and that would be, according to that, that would work to explain the Mishnah. But there's one more problem with this. But it's basically if they did ma'amal, and it's if you compare shomeret yabam without ma'amal to an arusa, they're very different. Arusa had a kiddushin. Shomeret yabam didn't have any sort of kiddushin. But if you say it's a case where there's ma'amal, ma'amar is parallel to kiddushin. Well, then why did the Mishnah need to say, I swear I was lo satiti arusa and lo satiti shomeret yabam, which is basically the exact same thing as arusa, because there was ma'amal, which is kiddushin. So they say, no, that doesn't bother us. There's a lot of repetition in this Mishnah. Again, what did it say? I pointed this out at the beginning already. Knusa means married also. There's also repetition there. So they say, there's two types of marriages. One is the husband you choose to marry, and the other is the husband you have to marry to fulfill the mitzvah of yibum. So when it said arusa and nisuat, it meant the husband you chose, and when it said shomeret yabam and knusa, it meant kiddushin ma'amal and marriage of your right to chavre, meaning it's the husband's friend, meaning it's his brother's wife that he ends up having to marry. So there's the ones you choose, and there's the ones that are chosen for you. And that's why I use different terminology, but there's no real difference between them. Okay, so with that, we've explained the Mishnah in one option, according to one option, which is, again, it's a case where he shouldn't have done this, but he ended up having relations with her before, right after the engagement. Okay, and then everything happened after that. And remember, the kinoi and the stira happened when she was engaged. And that's what she's swearing. I didn't do anything with him then. And then, he waited until the marriage, even though it wasn't fully consummated, but after the chuppah, he already betrothed her. He then brought her to the Beit HaMikdash and had to drink the Sotah waters. And that's how we resolve this Arusa case, that the Mishnah could make sense, and then it would prove Yesh chuppah the psulot against Rava, who tried to knock out the Mishnah. Now we're going to have two other explanations of the Mishnah, different types of explanations. Rav Papa Amar. Hi Tana who did Tanya matches this Tanaitic opinion. In other words, we've been explaining according to certain things that, number one, we have this Tachari Sheikh, she had to have had relations with her husband first, right? So now Rav Papa is going to say, Hi Tana who did Tanya, Ein mekanin la arusa la ashkota kashi arusa, aval mekanin ota la ashkota kashi nisua. We said that you can't, what did we say? You can't have her drink the Sotah waters when she's betrothed, but you can have everything transpire during the erusin and just bring her to the temple when she's nisua. And what he disagrees with is two halachot. Number one, he doesn't think you have to necessarily have slept with your husband before the kinoi and the stira, because the kinoi and the stira happen before they have relations. He also disagrees with the nikame avon, and he doesn't think that that means that he can't have slept with her at all afterwards. In other words, no, it's true he's forbidden to sleep with her after he warns her. But if he does anyway, it doesn't preclude him from bringing her to the temple. So he basically says what happened here in the Mishnah was very simple. You don't have any of these problems. They were engaged. He started warning her about this man. She went into a room. They got married. They consummated the marriage, which again was against the law, but it doesn't have any effect on his ability to bring her to the Beit HaMikdash. He brings her to the Beit HaMikdash at the end. And again, you don't need that he have relations with her before the other guy did, before she was suspected, according to his interpretation. And that's how you can explain the Mishnah without having any of those questions, because those questions are irrelevant because this Tana doesn't hold them. Third opinion, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, Al Yedei Gilgul. This is the most simple opinion. Okay, first we have to explain the concept. What is Gilgul Shvuah? Gilgul Shvuah is a very simple concept. The Torah doesn't like you swearing. They don't have you swear, right? Lo tisa Hashem Hashem lashav, don't take God's name in vain. So we don't like swearing. However, if we make you swear for a reason that halachically you would need to swear, like there's all sorts of things where halacha says, if right, you're having a monetary dispute, there's certain situations where we'll make you swear. Like, for example, if one witness says, like, I have something in my hands and you say it's yours. So if there's one witness that says it's yours, you can swear to get it given back to you. Otherwise, the burden of proof is on you. So if there's one witness that confirms your opinion, then the court says, okay, well, then you can swear, say, I swear it's mine, and we'll let you have it. Gilgul Shvuah means that once you're already swearing, we sometimes make you swear about other things, even though you don't, the halacha wouldn't have made you swear about them, but you can just add them to the list once you're already making a shvuah. This woman was satit, she was a sotah from marriage. It's not a rusin. But once the husband already, right, he suspected her, let's just assume, he suspected her after they got married already. And then she went to a room with the low and the man, and the regular case should be the summa b'sotah. When she goes to swear, she says, I swear I didn't veer from you, not, right? I didn't stray from our wet marriage, even when I was engaged, even though we weren't talking about engagement. It's just she adds it on to the list. That's the easiest interpretation. And then you can again say the Mishnah is right. There's no problem with this Mishnah. It makes perfect sense. Now we're going to have another thing, a new halacha, which is going to connect a little to our topic. Shalach Rav Amishmed Rabbi Yochanan. He sends the following halacha in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. A man does ma'amar with his yevama. What happens when you do ma'amar? If there's another brother, yesh lo ach. Okay, now, at this point, what happens? When Reuven does ma'amar with his, let's say, or Shimon, okay, there's Reuven dies. Shimon does ma'amar with his wife. Levi is now forbidden to marry her because once one brother does ma'amar, it prevents all the other brothers on a rabbinic level. Remember, because ma'amar only has rabbinic status. So if he has another brother, afilu hi ku kohen vi kohenim psalam in truma. As soon as it's fascinating, as soon as one brother does ma'amar, theoretically, right? What happened? The brother Reuven, they're all kohanim. She's a bat kohen. Reuven dies. She can go back to her family and eat truma, right? But when Shimon does ma'amar with her, he prevents her from eating truma. Why? Because he has a brother who's forbidden to marry her. So theoretically, she's mishtameret l'bi'ah psula, right? If she were to marry, she's in this in-between stage. Don't worry, in a minute we're going to say this doesn't make sense. But right now, we think it makes sense. So they say leman, according to who would this work? Rabbi Meir, who said, right, mishtameret l'bi'ah psula de'oraita disqualifies you. Well, Rabbi Meir, mishtameret l'bi'ah psula lo achla, she can't eat midoraita, but Rabbanit miyam. This is only rabbinic. The fact that she can't marry Levi is a rabbinic ordinance. Rabbi Meir never said it about rabbinic things. He only said when it was deoraita on a Torah level. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, well, according to them, they permit it when it's deoraita. Of course, they're going to permit it when she's omedet l'bi'ah psula mid'Rabbanan. So nobody could possibly say this. Rav and Amar, when Rav came, he said, this is what Rabbi Yochanan said. Okay, you messed up what Rabbi Yochanan said. This is what he said. Asaba ma'amar b'yivimto, divrei hakol achla. Okay, if he does ma'amar, she can eat truma. But yesh lo ach halal, divrei hakol ein ochel. Now we get a deoraita problem. If she has a brother who's a halal, if she were to marry him, that would forbid her from eating truma. It would disqualify her. Then she can't eat. And then he says, but there is a bit of a debate here. Lo nechleku ela shenatan laget. The debate would be, and here's the debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, and this is what we're going to end with, understanding this debate. If Shimon, forget about Levi, if Shimon gives her a get, okay, in other words, the halal worked out a case where it's doraita, and then we could say, okay, well, then it matches Rabbi Meir. But now we're going to say the debate is, what if he gives her a get? Now, what's the issue? Remember, we learned this a lot already. If a yabam gives a woman, he's a shomer yabam, a get. So on a doraita level, this is meaningless. She wasn't married to him. On a Rabbanit level, they say, well, get is like chalitza. So we're now going to, just like if he did chalitza, she'd be forbidden to marry him or any of the other brothers. Now she's forbidden to marry him and any other brothers. So now they say, what if he gives her a get? Now she's already forbidden to marry him and all the other brothers, but only on a rabbinic level. So this is going to be the question. Rabbi Yochanan amar ochelet, she can still continue to eat truma. Reish Lakish amar eina ochelet, she cannot eat truma anymore. So let's understand the reasons. Rabbi Yochanan amar ochelet, and now he says, afilu the Rabbi Meir amar eina ochelet. Rabbi Meir said in the Mishnah, she can't eat. That's hanemila Mishnah Meir lebi apsula doraita. That was a coin and a grusha that's forbidden on a Torah level. About the Rabbanan achla. But if it's only on a rabbinic level, like it is here, because the get doesn't have any validity on a Torah level here, so she could eat. So even Rabbi Meir is going to agree she could eat. Obviously, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon. Reish Lakish amar eina ochelet. And now he's going to say, afilu the Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, who permit it in the Mishnah, they're not going to permit it in this case. The opposite. Why? What were we talking about in the Mishnah? It was a Kohen and a divorcee who did kiddushin. Now, normally, right, which now they're omedet lebiyah psula, but if the biyah would be kshera, what would happen? If she was a regular woman who marries a Kohen, she'd be allowed to eat truma. So that's why Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, we said that a lot of times already, that their whole thing is, since if it was a good relationship, he would have enabled her. So therefore, in the kiddushin stage, it's not enough to disqualify her. So now they say, but aval hacha, kevan de'ein lo la'achil b'makom acher lo. A get never has if a Kohen gives a get to a woman, it doesn't permit her ever to eat truma. It's giving a get is not a matir to eat truma. It's the opposite. It disconnects them. So this get wouldn't work even according to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon because it doesn't have the koch la'achil b'makom acher. Now, let's be smart about it. What do you mean it doesn't have the koch? A get for sure does have a koch. What does that mean? If a Yisrael is married to a bat kohen and he gives her a get, what will happen? She'll go back to eating truma in her father's house. So a get does have the power to give the woman an ability to eat truma. But you can't say that because in this case, because chozeret, what does chozeret do? Pas kamineu krova lebenasha. What does it do? It disconnects the Yisrael from the bat kohen and allows her to return to her father's house. But in this case, she's a shomeret yabam, right? And he gave her, right? This case, he gives her a get. What does that do? Doesn't disconnect her. Hacha aval ha agidaba be. She's still connected to him. This kind of get doesn't allow ever to eat truma because she's still connected to the husband because until she does chalitza, she can't go back to her father's house. So this get has no capability. This particular get does not have the power. And that's what Reish Lakish says. Even Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, that permitted in our Mishnah, wouldn't permit it here because there it was kiddushin, which theoretically could have helped her to get truma. And this is get, which would never, a get in a yibum case would never allow the woman to eat truma because even to go back to her father's house, it doesn't permit. So that's why they have this machloket about what would we say in this case where he gives her a get. Okay, we'll end with that and we'll continue with the next part in tomorrow's class. Have a meaningful Yom HaZikaron and we'll meet up tomorrow on Yom HaTzmaut as usual.